Hello and welcome to this video where I'm going to be going through all of my personal highlights of all of the main conferences of E3 this year. Because there's so many smaller events now, I'm not going to talk about absolutely everything and I'm just going to stick to the main conferences. So don't be expecting me to talk about the Gearbox conference or the Future Games Show or anything else like that. I'm just sticking with the big dogs. So to kick things off, we actually have an event that technically isn't a part of E3 itself, but I feel like it's big enough to warrant talking about in this video. It is, of course, Summer Game Fest. As I just said, Summer Game Fest technically wasn't a part of E3, but it was timed in such a way that it almost felt like the appetizer for E3, so I think it still counts. The only game that was really noteworthy for me at this event was Elden Ring, which as you all probably know is the new game in the Soulsborne series developed by From Software. This looks really good and was easily one of the highlights of the entirety of E3. It basically looks like a more open world Dark Souls thematically, but with a faster paced combat system like Bloodborne, and a lot more maneuverability and stealth, just like Sekiro. It also brings back the online systems and character customization elements that were strangely absent from Sekiro, and I'm glad these things are coming back. Overall, this basically seems like the ultimate mashup of every Soulsborne game so far, and I'm really excited to get into it. Hopefully it'll topple Bloodborne as the best game in the entire series, but that's a pretty big ask. The second event on our agenda is Ubisoft Forward, and this is normally one of the weaker conferences for me personally, because they just never talk about Rayman and they've not done a new Splinter Cell game for years either. While this year was no different for either of those two things, I would imagine that there was actually quite a few things here that most people were interested in. However, I'm not most people. Ubisoft Forward was yet another kind of mediocre event for me. Because I'm not really into big by-the-numbers open world games, and because I'm also not normally interested in shooters either, there really wasn't a lot here for me. A couple of things did stand out though, which prevented the event from being a complete flop, so let's talk about them. Rocksmith Plus is my first highlight of Ubisoft Forward, and it basically looks like an expanded version of the standard Rocksmith. This being an application that was designed to help you learn how to play the guitar in real life, rather than a plastic fake guitar like the Guitar Hero and Rock Band games used. I never actually used the original version of Rocksmith, so I can't vouch for if it's any good or not, but I do really like the idea of this. Years and years ago I got a bass and wanted to learn how to play it, but like most teenagers, I quickly gave up and never really learned anything outside of the very basics. I would like to think that Rocksmith Plus would be able to teach me some more advanced stuff, but to be honest, the subscription payment method really puts me off. Still, if you're a budding guitarist, I do think this genuinely looks really interesting, even if it's not technically a game per se, and the technology involved here looks really impressive. You can even play acoustic now and use your phone as a mic, which is apparently good enough to accurately pick up precise notes that you play. Pretty cool. My second and final highlight of Ubisoft Forward is Riders Republic, which unlike Rocksmith Plus is definitely an actual video game. On the surface it's basically a sports game where you can go mountain biking, skiing, snowboarding, wingsuit flying, and even rocket wingsuit flying. It stands out from other similar games though by having a ton of social elements where you can see other players riding around and interact in a big hub area. It also features a massive open world to ride around in, but upon starting an event the game becomes more closed off and focused, with a stadium set up for the trick challenges and set tracks for the race challenges. The thing that's slightly off-putting about this is that firstly, it's difficult to tell exactly how it controls. It seems to be more of a simulation than, say, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, but maybe not quite as complex as something like Skate. But either way, this is something that's going to make selling the game difficult, because you don't really know exactly what it is until you play it for yourself. The other thing that puts me off is that this is Ubisoft and it'll probably be jam-packed with microtransactions, and that's just an instant turn-off for me. I like to play games and know that the content for the game is actually within the game itself and can be unlocked, rather than paying for a game and then constantly being reminded that I should be paying for even more stuff. But hey, if that doesn't bother you, this does look like it would be quite a good time, and plus the graphics looked nice too if you're into that. Next, we move on to one of the best conferences of E3 2021, which of course came from Microsoft and Bethesda. Because I don't have an amazing PC or an Xbox Series X, I kinda struggled to get into this one as much, just because I knew that I wouldn't be able to play a lot of the games that were featured here. However, by the end of the conference, I actually left it thinking that at some point down the line, I will actually get a Series X, just because there are so many good looking games coming out for it. So yeah, I guess this conference actually was a success if I left it thinking that I was going to be buying the new console at some point, although admittedly I will wait for it to go down in price quite dramatically before I do that. But either way, that must mean that it was quite a good event. Of course, we saw most of the games you would expect, things like Halo Infinite in its free-to-play multiplayer mode, which looks like a lot of fun. But the main highlights of this event for me were the selection of indie games we saw. I'm really glad Microsoft is supporting these smaller studios, and I'm super excited to learn more about some of these. So first we had 12 Minutes, which is actually a game that I've been anticipating for years now, and I really want to know more about how it actually plays. It's this game where you're trapped in this 12-minute time loop, and in that time frame a hitman bursts into your house and kills you and your wife. So the objective of the game becomes about trying to work out why this guy is coming and how to get out of the situation. I really like the overhead perspective and the general visual style of this, and like I say, I just want to know how you actually interact with the world. It's kinda weird how we weren't shown that, considering it's so close to release now. I'm wondering if it's a thing where you have to plan out all of your movements and then you watch as they play out over the 12 minutes, or whether you control the character in real time. As of now, I have no idea, but it looks really good. Psychonauts 2 was another big highlight, but this is also another one that's already been announced and shown off in great detail before. It's a 3D platformer which immediately grabs my attention, but then the theme of the game draws me in further, with it being about diving into people's minds to fight their inner demons as you learn more about them and attempt to help them deal with their troubles. Then on top of that you have the bright cartoony style and silly humour that makes it feel like a traditional Saturday morning cartoon. All of these things combine and you've got yourself something that looks really great. The next game I loved the look of was a brand new announcement, and it's a game called Somerville. This is another indie game that looks incredible, and at first I was really thinking that this was the new Playdead game that they've been teasing for a while now. Playdead being the team behind Limbo and Inside, which are two of my favourite games of all time. But it turns out it's not. It's a completely original game by a team called Jump Ship. But then I did some research into this company and found out that one of the members of Jump Ship is Dino Patey, one of the founders of Playdead. So that definitely explains the similar feel to Limbo and Inside. So now that I know who's making Somerville, my intrigue for this game has been massively heightened. But even disregarding that, it still looks amazing. It's this game set during some kind of alien invasion, and you follow several characters on their journeys to survive and escape the coming apocalypse. It doesn't seem to feature any combat either, and focuses on normal, everyday people, which is pretty refreshing, and it definitely feels like this is going to be an extremely memorable experience. Like with Elden Ring, this is one of my highlights of E3 as a whole. Then finally, we have a game called Replaced. It's set in an alternate version of the 1980s where technology has evolved much more rapidly than in our own universe. The pixel art style combined with modern lighting and visual effects looks extremely similar to another game I'm really anticipating called The Last Night. But whereas that game looks more slow-paced, Replaced actually looks like it's gonna have a lot of combat. So I think there's room for both of these games to coexist. It's kinda difficult to tell exactly what the game is from the footage that we've been shown, but I'm sold on what very little we have seen. Next up we have Square Enix and Capcom. Who knows what these two events could hold in store for us? Probably all manner of wonderful things. Yeah, there was literally nothing. Let's just move on and forget that these conferences even happened. Last up, we have my most anticipated show of all of E3. And while it was nowhere near as good as I thought it would be, and some things I thought that would get shown off or announced just straight up weren't, it was still a really good show, and probably the winner of E3 overall. The only other contender being Microsoft and Bethesda, but either way, let's take a look at what Nintendo did show. Yes, yes, yes. Super Monkey Ball Banana Mania is here. For those of you that are new to the channel, first of all, welcome and thanks for making it this far through the video, but secondly, you might not know that I reasonably recently discovered the Super Monkey Ball series and proceeded to review every single game because I loved it so much. And now, with Banana Mania, we have a full-on remake of Super Monkey Ball 1, 2 and Deluxe, which were easily the best games in the entire series. Plus, we have loads of additional things not seen in the original games, like unlockable cosmetics for your characters and the balls that they roll around in, the addition of newer characters like Yan Yan and Doctor, online leaderboards, new modes like this one where you need to avoid picking up any bananas, and there's probably a lot that we don't even know about yet. I know for a lot of people this was probably just a pretty mediocre reveal, but I'm honestly so excited to play this that it's ridiculous. This, Somerville, and Elden Ring are my top 3 announcements of E3 2021 for sure. I doubt many other people would rank Super Monkey Ball up there with being as exciting as Elden Ring, but there we go. Next we had the reveal of a brand new Metroid game, but not Metroid Prime 4, which is apparently still in early development, but instead we got Metroid 5, titled Metroid Dread. For those that are confused by this, the Metroid series is kind of split into 2 separate sub-series, the Prime series and the Standard series. While they are connected and exist in the same universe, they offer such distinct playstyles that I guess they've just chosen to separate them in terms of numbered entries. So, Metroid Dread is the sequel to Metroid, Metroid 2 Return of Samus, Super Metroid and Metroid Fusion, hence the Metroid 5 numbering. I don't know where Metroid Other M fits into all of this, but I guess we can forget about that. Anyway, this is a 2D Metroid game which goes back to the series' roots, where you're seemingly being stalked by a robot guy. And it looks like this robot is going to be a persistent threat through the whole game, basically taking that idea from Metroid Fusion, but expanding it. In fact, a planned sequel to Metroid Fusion was in the works for the original DS back in 2006, and the title of this cancelled Metroid game was Metroid Dread. So it's great to see this game finally see the light of day, even if it's probably nothing like what it would have been on the DS. The gameplay of this looks very similar to the 3DS remake of Metroid 2 Return of Samus, which was called Metroid Samus Returns. So if you liked that, this basically looks like that, but on a bigger scale. Good stuff. Then we got WarioWare Get It Together, which is a micro game collection that now has multiplayer where you can compete and work together with friends to see who can get the best scores. This is a really difficult one to actually sell because what you do is so simple, but I feel like the style of it is so immediately appealing that it works. It's about time we saw a WarioWare game on the Switch as well. It's been far too long since this series has made an appearance, and I'm looking forward to it a lot. Then finally, we got a tiny glimpse into the world of Breath of the Wild 2, which still doesn't have a concrete release date and still doesn't have a proper title either, but still. It looks like this one is taking some inspiration from Skyward Sword by having a floating world and then the standard world of Hyrule. What I will say about this is that it runs the risk of being a bit too similar to Breath of the Wild 1, and it might lack that sense of uniqueness that the original game had. But at the same time, we haven't seen enough to properly come to that conclusion quite yet. One difference is that instead of the Sheikah Slate from the first game, we now seemingly have a magic arm that gives us new abilities to play around with, which I'm sure will add a new dimension to the gameplay, which I'm looking forward to experimenting with. I also really like the look of the new armor Link seems to be wearing, so yeah, overall it looks good, but I really wish we saw a little bit more of it, like some unedited gameplay or something, but that'll come with time. This has been in development for a seriously long time though, and I really hope it lives up to the amount of hype it's generating. I mean, they did it with Breath of the Wild 1, so they might do it again, who knows. But what I do know is that wraps up all of my highlights of E3 2021. To be honest, this was a very forgettable E3. There wasn't any announcements that were seriously mind-blowing or anything, but we did get quite a lot of smaller games to be looking forward to, which is definitely better than nothing. I think E3 is really struggling to remain relevant, and this is for several different reasons. First, there's now a lot more competition from other events like Gamescom and the Game Awards, which is making it so that game announcements are being spread more thinly across the year. Then we have the fact that most publishers are doing their own separate streams, which in some cases has made some of the biggest publishers completely drop out of E3 altogether, just like with Sony and EA. And then you also have the situation going on in the world right now that stops them from having an actual physical presence. The whole event just felt a bit like a shell of what it once was. Which is on one hand bad because I'll miss the days where every game publisher brought out the big guns at the same time, but it's also good because it allows for more announcements throughout the year rather than going through loads of dry seasons. I do wonder if next year's E3 will be bigger than this one. If they're able to do a more traditional E3, I would love for Sony and EA to make a comeback, but I don't know if that will happen. Another thing that was a little bit disappointing is that while Nintendo's event was my personal favourite one, it lacked quite a few things that I was really hoping to see. There was no mention of more games consoles like the N64 coming to the online service, no new model of the Switch console, no Mario Kart, no more information on Splatoon 3, no new Bayonetta 3 or Metroid Prime 4 trailers. Wind Waker and Twilight Princess HD were basically straight up confirmed to not even be in consideration for Switch ports yet, and there was no new mainline Mario game either. It almost feels like Nintendo are starting to wind down with Switch releases, which is obviously so that they can launch some of these more anticipated games on the next console. Hopefully we'll see that console announced in the next couple of years or so that they can compete with Sony and Microsoft a little bit more directly. But anyway, that wraps up all of my thoughts on E3 2021 and all of the main conferences that happened. I would love to know what your favourite games shown at the event were. There was quite a wide variety of stuff, so I would imagine that you liked the look of something completely different to me. So let me know in the comments. Also, while you're down there, subscribe to see more stuff like this coming soon, and give the video a like if you enjoyed it. And until next time, bye!